The Honourable John Ruddock.
Mr. President, I rise as a global boiling denialist. Change in the climate is a good and natural thing. It has spurred the evolution of life. Earth has had periods when the polar ice caps grew so large they met at the equator to create snowball Earth. At other times it's been so warm the polar caps were lush forests. Geologists know we are currently in an ice age. The polar ice caps today are larger than the geological average, but thankfully we have enjoyed a warmer period for about 16,000 years. And in that time, look at all we have achieved. Cold stunts life. Warmth gives us dynamism. The Greens say our atmosphere has one temperature control switch, carbon dioxide. But anyone with a true love of the natural world knows there are probably hundreds of factors that influence temperature. We probably understand half. Since the Industrial Revolution, the atmosphere has risen by about 1 degree. This is not noticeable in any ecosystem. Koalas and platypuses live in unique ecosystems. They've been around for about 20 million years or so. They've experienced it far hotter and far cooler, but they and all the other creatures and fauna around them have adjusted, survived and lived on. We heard the mover of this matter of public importance say some foolish claims. Here's 5. 1, the Australian bushfires of 2020 were unprecedented. But here's what that partisan left-wing website Wikipedia says. Bushfires in Australia are a widespread and regular occurrence that have contributed significantly to shaping the nature of the continent over millions of years. Eastern Australia is one of the most fire-prone regions of the world, and its predominant eucalyptus forests have evolved to thrive on the phenomenon of bushfire, end quote. Bushfires are so much part of our ecosystem, we have several plants that only release seeds under the intensity of a bushfire. Colonial newspapers in the 19th century reported over 7,000 bushfires. The bushfires were so large in 1938-39 that ash fell in the cities of New Zealand. There is a horrific bushfire season about once a decade. That will continue. So rather than politically weaponising them, the conversation should be around mitigation. 2, the fires in the Northern Hemisphere are the worst on record. This is false. NASA satellites are unequivocal. In the year 2000, around 3% of the Earth's land surface was on fire at some point over a year, but that has trended down sharply and it's now almost 2%. But at the same time, media coverage of wildfires has increased 5-fold. Sensationalism sells. 3, she claimed there were unprecedented floods in China right now. Yes, 11 people tragically drowned overnight in China. But when we look at the list of the worst 10 floods in history, 6 are from China, with the death toll ranging from 145,000 to 4 million, which was the death toll as recently as 1931. And 4, we were told global boiling is happening faster than the scientists predicted. This is absurdly false. Like many doomsday movements, the global boilists cannot help setting doomsday dates to frighten weaker and often young minds. In 1989, the Associated Press made global headlines with the claim, a senior UN environmental officer, Noel Brown, says entire nations could be wiped off the face of the Earth by rising sea levels if global warming trend is not reversed by the year 2000. Didn't happen. In 2006, Al Gore said we have 10 years before we hit the point of no return. Didn't happen. In 2008, Rajendra Pachauri, head of the UN Climate Panel, said if there's no action before 2012, that's too late. What do we do in the next 2 to 3 years will determine our future. Didn't happen. In 2018, Greta Thunberg tweeted, a top climate scientist is warning climate change will wipe out all of humanity unless we stop using fossil fuels over the next 5 years. That anniversary recently passed and the tweet deleted. But let's say the global boiling denialists are all wrong. Let's assume for a moment that for the first time in history, an apocalyptic doomsday cult was actually correct. The Greens and the leader of the government spoke on this subject at length, but neither of them mentioned China. Western nations like Australia, the US and Europe have steadily reduced our carbon dioxide over the past quarter of a century in real terms. Some say we should have reduced further, but regardless, reduce we have. But in the same period, China has increased its carbon emissions by 500%. China now emits 11 billion tonnes of carbon a year. The US is less than half that. China now has 1,110 coal-powered electricity plants with a tonne in the pipeline. The US has only 240 and little old Australia has a mere 19. So China is not only massively the largest carbon emitter, but it's growing exponentially. Now, according to the Greens, We're heading for an apocalypse. It's all because of one thing, carbon emissions, and China is spewing out endless and exponential carbon emissions. But Mr. President, no mention of China. They're not interested. If the Greens are correct, they should praise Western governments for cutting emissions, campaign for trade sanctions and protest out the front of Chinese embassies demanding a massive reduction in this planet-poisoning gas. But oddly, there's no mention of China. Why is the baddies, the Min's government, the Liberals, the Nationals and of course the global boiling denialists, when China is easily the elephant in the carbon-emitting room? I want to put on the record, I do not support sanctions against China because their industrialisation has lifted over $1 billion out of grinding poverty that was inflicted on them by socialist ideology. Global boiling is about domestic politics. Global boiling is a Trojan horse to bring about the all-powerful big government that some on the left crave. The member bemoaned an ideological desire from the coalition, but that's not the real ideological desire at play here. The Communist Party of Australia collapsed in 1991, and the following year the Australian Greens were established. I acknowledge there are many good people in the Greens who have a passion to protect the natural world, and I salute them. But it is also undeniable that some former activists from the Communist Party joined the Greens, and all the old enemies of the communists, capitalism and America, etc., are today rebadged as global boiling denialists, while communist China is given a completely free pass. What a coincidence. I recently saw a video on Twitter of the mover releasing an injured but recovered koala into the wild. This is the real-world environmentalism that I urge the Greens to focus on and not get distracted by the global boiling fairy tale. I want to conclude by saying to the young people of New South Wales, life is wonderful. Make the most of it. Do all you can to protect the natural world, but do not be tricked into thinking doomsday is just around the corner, because it ain't.